Hi everyone. Well, I'm really sad that we can't be together making music, but I thought to help us get through this time together, it would be fun to do something that we don't normally have time to do, which is to explore some different music together that we're not actually playing, but that is just fantastic in one way or another, written for the orchestra. So I thought we could really use something right now, since it's such a difficult time, to lighten our spirits. So I picked for this first video a piece that at least really lightens my spirits. That's Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. We'll look at the first movement today, even though all the movements are really fantastic. So what we're going to do is just sort of walk through the piece. I want to point out some details that I find really interesting and particularly beautiful, and maybe help you listen to it in a new way. And I'll also send you some links to some other recordings in addition to this really fun video that we'll be watching as we analyze the piece together. If you don't have any music theory background, you might want to watch my short little, I think it's 6 or 7 minute long, intro to some harmony video that I've also made and that I've linked separately, just so you can get a sense of some of the terms that I'll be using at times. But I'll try to keep things pretty general so that everyone, no matter what your level of music theory background, can get something out of this discussion. So I'd love to get some feedback from you. Let me know if you have any questions or what you think and how I might be able to make other videos better, or indeed if there are other pieces you want me to look at. So I hope you're all doing well, and I hope to talk with you soon. The video that we'll be using to help us through this is a fantastic one with the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam and the conductor Carlos Kleiber. This is a famous video that was made in the early 1980s. And Kleiber, as you'll see, is a really fascinating conductor to watch. He has extraordinary interpretive ideas. It's an amazing orchestra and a fantastic concert hall. So there are many great recordings of this piece, but I thought you might particularly enjoy this one. And I'll post the link to the full video, which you can watch on YouTube, because I hope you'll have some time to just listen and watch the entire piece and enjoy it. Before we can dig into the piece itself, we need some basic understanding of sonata form, which was one of the most important forms for musical composition, particularly in the classical and romantic eras, but composers continued using it through the 20th and even into our own century now. And it's not like every piece in sonata form is created in the same way. There's a huge amount of flexibility in this. It's not just a mold that you pour some music into, but it's kind of a set of guidelines for a way that a large structure of music, like a symphony movement, can operate. It's in three main parts: exposition, development, recapitulation. And there are two optional bookends: a slow introduction and a coda. And we'll see that Beethoven 7 has both of those bookends. And in fact, Beethoven 7 has a very, very long slow introduction, which we'll get to in a minute. But the most important main sections are exposition, in which you have a first theme, which is established in the home key. That's called the tonic. Remember to watch my harmony video if you're not sure what these terms are meaning, like tonic and dominant. You have a first theme, which is in the tonic. That goes for a bit, then you have some kind of transition that gets you from the tonic into whatever key your second theme is going to be in. The second theme in some composers isn't actually a new tune. Sometimes it's just a new sort of group of ideas that don't really make a melody on their own. Sometimes it's even the first theme again, but just in a different key. But in Beethoven, often there is a separate theme, and there is in this piece, or in fact a second group of themes, some new ideas, and they're in a different key. That's the really key point. Usually if you're in major, your first theme's in the tonic and your second theme's in the dominant, but composers, particularly in the 19th century, just start going to a whole bunch of other keys. The point is, it needs to be a different key. It needs to feel different. We modulate somewhere else, and that creates some tension in the form. There's this sense like we need to get back home by the end of the piece. And then after the second theme, sometimes there's a kind of optional closing theme. Sometimes it's the first theme again, but restated in a different key in the dominant. Usually this closing theme will be in whatever key this second theme was in. So this is all called the exposition. And often when you get to the end of the exposition, there will be a repeat sign, and you go back and do the whole exposition again. And in Beethoven 7, sometimes people do the repeat. There is a repeat written there, but sometimes they skip the repeat if they feel like audiences by now have got the idea or know the piece. But I think it's nice to do the repeat. And then comes the really exciting section, the development, where you take all of these ideas, melodic, thematic ideas from the exposition, and you kind of mash them up. You make deviled eggs out of them, You go to lots of different keys. There's usually much more tension. There's a sense like we don't really know what's going on. We feel these fragments of the tune getting mashed up. This is where Beethoven was perhaps most innovative, and you get the sense he just has so much creative energy behind the development. In terms of key, it's unstable. It keeps moving around to lots of different keys. But eventually, and this section can be very, very long, you wind up at a retransition, which can be quite a short section or a longer section, where you begin to feel a surging of energy back towards the tonic, towards the home key. And when you begin to feel that, you know, okay, we're in the retransition. Occasionally, composers will fake you out and go to a different key. But most of the time, retransition will move you back to what's called the recapitulation. And the recapitulation is the kind of sibling to the exposition, where you can see it has basically the same structure. The first theme, which is in the tonic, it can be a little bit changed from the first time, and often by Beethoven's time, it's a little bit different, maybe reorchestrated, for example, but basically the same idea. And then you don't need a transition to get you to a new key anymore, because look, we're going to stay in the tonic for this entire section, pretty much. But composers like to be creative, and maybe they'll act like they're going to a different key, but eventually wind up back home. The point is that the second theme kind of resolves the tension that was created by it being in a different key in the first place up here in the exposition, and is now in the home key in the tonic. So everything feels much more settled and at home. You can have a closing theme if you want to, and then the piece could simply end with some nice cadences and chords, or, and Beethoven is particularly fond of this, you can have a coda. And the coda can almost sometimes be in Beethoven like another development, where you mash up the themes again, you go to some different keys. I say sometimes finishes the business of the coda, because it does sort of turn over any leaves that hadn't been turned over in the development. But eventually you're going to get back to the tonic, and you're going to feel very, very comfortable that, oh no, this is our key. And all of the work of this piece, all of the drama in all of these themes and all of these modulations is finally resolved. It's a very classical idea in a way, that there's going to be resolution, right? Later on in the 19th and 20th centuries, composers messed with the idea that maybe there's not going to be resolution, right? And that's a much more unsettling idea. But in this era, no matter what struggles you went through, you will overcome them, is essentially the kind of overarching philosophical idea, at least I think, and you wind up back in the home key. All right, so that's a quick intro to sonata form. Let's see how it actually plays out in Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. Okay, so here is the score of the beginning of the piece. We mostly will look at a piano reduction just because it'll be a lot easier for you to see, but I did want you to see that we've got a full classical orchestra, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, 2 trumpets, and timpani. Unfortunately, no trombones or tuba, no percussion other than timpani, no harp or anything. These get added later on. And a string section, first and second violins, violas, and cellos and basses are often written on the same line in this period because they're often playing the same music just an octave apart from one another. Okay, so the piece starts, as I mentioned, with kind of a long, slow introduction. It's marked poco sostenuto, a little bit sustained. And Beethoven creates a sense of grandeur at the beginning here with these big chords, which then give way to these little woodwind solos. Now just oboe, and this is the first theme of the introduction, just this ba da da da, which then the clarinet takes up, ba da da da, which then the horns take up, ba da da da. It's very simple, it's just half notes, mostly just arpeggiating a chord. And in a minute, those half notes are going to be replaced by scales. So it's just these two ideas, scales and arpeggios, fast scales and slow arpeggios, that will get combined together to create a lot of what makes this introduction work. Let's just listen to a little bit of it now. And now we'll switch to looking at the piano reduction that Franz Liszt made, just because I think it'll be a little bit easier for you all to see. So far, Beethoven's been combining those two ideas now in this big fortissimo section where many strings play at the same time the bass instruments play the scale, etc. And so he's mashing those two things on top of one another. All right, now at the moment we just stopped, there's going to be this beautiful wind serenade. And over the course of everything that's just happened, we've actually managed to get into a different key, and somehow now we're in C major. C major is not a closely related key to A major, right? A major has 3 sharps, C major has none. They're pretty far from one another. And so now these woodwind serenade is just in a different world from that opening. It's very beautiful though. Let's just listen to how that works in the full orchestra part. Now Beethoven is going to build back up to eventually get us back to at least a key which is closer to A major, but it's going to take quite some harmonic maneuvering and this amazingly slow orchestral crescendo. But I'll let you listen to that on your own later. Let's skip ahead a little bit into this slow introduction a little bit later. Here Beethoven has built back up to the slow half note idea with the 16th notes on the bottom, etc. And then gradually that winds down again too, and he gets back to that woodwind serenade, but in a different key. Now we're in F major. F is also not close to A major. It's sort of close to C major, actually. So we've got these two worlds happening. The big bombastic world of A major and its associated keys with the 16th notes and the half notes, and then this sweet wind serenade. And it doesn't seem like the two really have very much to do with one another. But we'll see these two worlds and their associated key areas come back in the main body of the piece. Because remember, this is just the slow introduction so far. These themes aren't actually going to recur exactly as they are here. This is not like a preview of themes later to come, but it is a preview of the kind of emotional content and of the keys that are going to happen later, where Beethoven's essentially saying, we're going to go on some far-flung journeys here, but there's going to be an overarching mood of great joy and at times great serenity, like in that woodwind idea. So at the end of this introduction, Beethoven, as he so often does, gets really elemental, where it just gets stripped down to basics. We're still very, very soft at the top of this page here, and this is an F major triad, so we're still here in the key of F. This is home. Okay, so that's our home key. We're on that F major chord for 4 very gradually building measures, the crescendo, until finally that F just suddenly gives way to an E. Imagine if you were just listening to that. You might expect it to go or something, or maybe to some related chord, but instead it just skips down half a step. It's very surprising. And then he spends the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 measures pretty much stuck on E. Let's listen to how that plays out in the orchestra, and then how he'll turn that E into the beginning of the first theme of the exposition. incredible joy is built up here in this first theme. Beethoven, was pretty much deaf by this point, and it had in many ways quite a difficult life. But he has this extraordinary capacity to create this sense of jubilation. Of course, later on, he's going to write the Ode to Joy at the end of the Ninth Symphony. So let's just look at this first theme for just a second. It has these very important elements that we first heard in the flute, and now we get in the full orchestra. The most important thing I would say about it is the rhythm. Ba, 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 da, bum. And even while the melody is doing that, the lower instruments here in the full orchestra version are doing. So every beat you've got da 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 da. And that's perhaps the most important takeaway, is that Beethoven in this entire movement constructs, at least in the fast section of the movement, constructs pretty much everything based on some version of this melody. In just a moment, we're going to have this chord. It's right here, which is going to force us to leave the key. All of a sudden, we seem to be in C-sharp minor. It's really uncertain exactly what's going on. This is going to be our transition material into the second theme. The second theme, when it shows up, is this wonderful dialogue between this very fluid melody and these running scales, which you'll now hear in the orchestra. So let's skip ahead to the second theme. Whoops, that didn't last long. We were so comfortably in our second theme group. We were in E major. We had the first lyrical part. We had then the more jumpy part based on the rhythm of the first theme. That was great, but then all of a sudden, in just two measures, right here, we wind up in C major. Remember back in the introduction, when we had we also surprisingly wound up in C major there. So he kind of foreshadowed this surprise, but still it's shocking that the second theme group doesn't last very long. We're just in somewhere completely new. And I guess what I want you to take away from this is that while you're listening to something like a Beethoven symphony, a really active and fun way to listen that you can really get inside the music with is to try to imagine what is going to happen next. What's the next expected harmonic move? Here, what we would think would happen is something like this. I suppose we would think that would happen if we didn't know that Beethoven always liked to have a few tricks up his sleeve, because instead he goes to C major and begins this really mysterious unwinding to get us back into E major, the dominant, which is where we're supposed to end this whole big long exposition section anyway. Ah, good. E major, we're back. You might call this the closing theme, but what it really is kind of the first theme rhythm again. If you look at the bass clef here, and over again, with still some surprising harmonies. Listen to this one right here. That's an F major chord. Remember F major, also from the introduction? And then suddenly we're back in E major again. It's that weird F to E thing that he did in the introduction. This is the amazing thing about Beethoven, is all of these surprises are somehow tied together throughout the entire movement. Beethoven winds up the exposition with where you normally have a closing theme, back here in the dominant in E major, and instead he does what I mentioned some composers do. He puts the first theme in again, but in the key of the dominant. So it sounds like this. That scale, which seems like it's going to be E major, he twists at the very end with that that D natural, bum, 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 then 2 measures of rest, then either a repeat or straight to the development. Now. C major again, but this mysterious section where he takes the first theme and winds it through this pianissimo. I won't go into a lot of detail about the development. I'll let you discover that for yourself, but I do want to look at the build up to the end of the development when he has this magical sequence of harmonies and then eventually just erupts with the main rhythm of the first theme, the bump ba bump ba bump ba rhythm, which seems to become just unleashed on its own and become intensely dramatic in D minor. Let's just listen to this build-ups from the top of this page. Right before we got back to that first theme, we didn't even really know it until slightly after it happened, but this retransition is this moment when we come to rest on all of these E's. All this E, E, E foreshadows the way that the flute melody had begun before. Remember all those E's coming out of the introduction? Harkens back to that, but now with full orchestra. And then we're finally back to the first theme in the original key, in the tonic, recapitulation. One of the fun things in sonata form is to see how the composer then recomposes the way that the first theme gets to the second theme, so that the second theme winds up in the home key, in the tonic key, and we have that sense of stability. Beethoven, of course, has a really ingenious way of doing that. I'll let you listen to that on your own. The last thing I want to point out is an element of the coda. And codas are kind of a Beethoven speciality, where they're almost like a second development. And let me just show you the way that this coda begins. The recapitulation ends just the same way as the exposition ended, with a scale. In the exposition, it was that funky E major scale, remember? Here, because we're back in the home key and the tonic, it's an A major scale, this one here. Oh, that's actually the scale we expected. But then, 2 bars of rest. Now we know we're headed somewhere different. Let's see what actually happens. And I will leave you on that extremely unresolved note because I really want to encourage you to listen to the entire movement. I hope you'll watch this whole video. I'm also posting links in my email to a bunch of other really great recordings. There are many, many more out there. This symphony has been recorded literally hundreds of times. And I hope this has given you also a little bit of a taste of how you can look at music in terms of form and key areas. And I hope you'll all study music theory at some point just because I think it really enriches the whole experience. Most importantly, right now, I hope you'll all just enjoy listening to some great orchestra music, and feel free to be in touch with me if you'd like to share some music with the other members of the orchestra, or just ask any questions about what you've seen here. Take care, everybody.